Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are heading into the final part of playoffs. Let me just adjust my microphone. I'm a bit too loud in my own ears. We're heading into the finals. For those who don't know, the way it looks right now is that G2 need to face MAD Lions for, of course, the last spot in the finals. The key factor that Fnatic has for themselves over the other team is the fact that they need to play back-to-back best of fives, which is very, very exhausting in itself. So the bracket isn't a true double elimination, because usually in those cases the team or the player that would be in the winner bracket final and winning that, they would have two lives, right? Two best of fives, I think, is a bit silly to play in a day, right? Still, I think back-to-back best of fives is very, very difficult, especially in League of Legends. Fnatic will have a lot of information, and at the same time, they will have... I do believe that they will have the higher seed. I would imagine it works that way, especially because MAD Lions come from the winner bracket. I think they would have the higher seed against G2, and then Fnatic a higher seed against either. But of course, I might be wrong because G2 came into the tournament with #1 seed, right? So there is a possibility I'm wrong. I don't know how to look it up. Maybe someone in the comments can tell me. I would hope that being further in the winner bracket matters more. Nevertheless, it's time for me to talk about the matchup in itself. G2 versus MAD Lions. So it's a very exciting one because the last time we saw it, G2 actually lost. And that was the big takeaway from it all. But I want to remind everyone that the series was very close. The things that were the most memorable was that G2's level of play looked awful. I think for the first time we saw a G2 that was trying to cover for weaknesses in their decision making instead of focusing on their strengths, which was honestly absurd to see. In a lot of cases, G2 was looking to defend the bottom side of the map, but in reality, the approach they should have had was just to focus on that 2v2 mid lane. Those games where they were allowed to do so and they actually did it, they actually won those games through the Jarvan Rumble in one game, and also, of course, Perkz' Cassio in that one game where he got that triple kill and the whole game turned on its head. So it was absurd that they were using efforts into relieving bottom, and I think this was the wrong approach because, as we all know, Caps had probably the worst series of his life. There was a significant improvement in the series against Origen. I think it started in the draft. I think G2 came in with a much clearer plan because against MAD Lions, they lost one game against Kalista. MAD Lions was much better at controlling river in some cases when G2's bot lane was suffocated. And the key thing that MAD Lions does so well is that they are very good at forcing skirmishes, and G2 are not so good at not taking them in some scenarios. They, in a lot of cases, fight when it's not necessary. I didn't see the same level of recklessness in G2's play throughout the split. I think that's what made a lot of the early games a lot better, because I think decision-making where Jankos was supposed to be in the regular split was so sublime, and it made a lot of G2's games look a lot cleaner. And I think we saw some of that against Origen. The key thing about Origen is that in the early game, they struggled to control river at the same level as MAD Lions through bottom. In this first match, if we take a look at the draft, Syndra ban, Kalista Pantheon, standard bans. Kalista is a bit questionable considering Kalista bottom is not going to be a thing for Caps, right? So the Kalista ban is something that, you can definitely pick things into it or maybe potentially leave it as a ban into second wave. Nevertheless, first week of Aphelios, Yuumi, Ezreal, Nautilus, this we don't have an issue with, right? G2 made the adaptation from the previous series that they indeed banned Sett on red. I think in a lot of cases Sett went through, and I think Sett is very, very high prior considering he can go into that support role. Especially on red, he becomes stronger. Ornn was also open throughout this, but G2 carried this Trundle in their pocket. So at the time when I saw this draft, I was very surprised by the Aatrox pick. I think it doesn't really belong here. I think this was the chance to show why teams are banning Karthus. Maybe the Karthus ban was something that was a myth, but there was a clear issue for Origen here that they went in the second wave ban and Xerxes was put on Lee Sin, and it's not something that he plays too much, and it also doesn't belong into his composition. Picking Ezreal when you have Aatrox top and you're picking Azir mid. Did I say Ezreal or Lee Sin? Picking Lee Sin when you have Azir mid and Aatrox top makes less sense. Aatrox wants to play with something that does magical damage. Azir doesn't care too much, honestly. I think Lee Sin was kind of awkwardly placed here. I think this was, Xerxes trying to prove something more than else, but that's just speculation, so take it for what it is. The key thing here about the Trundle pick was that it put Xerxes in a position where a lot of these tank picks that he likes to play became less valuable. Elise, Karthus out, you can't pick Zac. Zac was something they banned themselves. Sejuani is also something you want to stay away from. I wanted to just highlight here that the Aatrox probably should have been a jungle pick, and then they could have picked a top laner later down the line. The reasoning behind the Aatrox pick is because he was so successful against Rogue, but Rogue is a much weaker team than G2, and I think this was a blunder in the draft, putting Xerxes in a terrible position, picking a top laner that honestly isn't too valuable. Aatrox is kind of meh. I think at this point in time, I think Renekton is a better version of what Aatrox wants to do, because Renekton is going to have Prio, he's going to be able to teamfight with the Blade Running King and look for opportunities. Sure, it's not the same as Spirit Soldier and Renekton, but I think Aatrox and Renekton operate in the same way. Renekton at least has a clear identity in the fact that he is going to dominate early game, and it's something that you can use as a trend in your draft and as a tool in your draft to transition yourself into the mid game. But Aatrox kind of he's okay at everything, and I think that makes it less worth it to pick a 3. Especially if you are handicapping your jungle for it. There is no value here. So I think you pick jungle 3 and then you look to pick a GP or Renekton or Aatrox 4-5, and I think you'll be fine. If the enemy shows on 4th, Aatrox or whatever pick that I mentioned, you can pick into it and be fine. The next thing is Trundle. If you lock in Trundle here, most of the time, I would say, the enemy's going to lock some ranged champion in, maybe a Kindred or something. You see a Maokai, you see a Trundle, you're going to pick Kindred. There are ways to deal with the Trundle pick, but in this scenario, it was very good preparation on G2's part to know that OG were in a stranglehold here. Nevertheless, it's all speculation. Azir gets locked in. I think the idea is that they are seeing a Maokai and they want a way to kill it, but honestly, Aphelios is good enough for it, and I think picking Azir into Ezreal Yuumi is just suicide. I think it's very, very bad, and it's not something that you want to do in this composition, especially when you see Maokai, Trundle, Ezreal, Yuumi, you're going to get outscaled, and whenever Azir gets outscaled, probably it's a terrible game for him. It's kind of a rule, because Azir is not going to impact the early game as much. He can be very safe and get away from ganks. This is what makes Azir so strong, partially why Corki becomes so strong as well. But in terms of impact and in terms of putting the map state in a way and pressuring the map state in a way where you impact the map, Azir is not the one, but it's also Origen's playstyle, right? And this is something that was echoed throughout. G2 played a beautiful 2v2 mid lane. They killed Azir a couple of times, and Lee Sin was non-existent. A key difference between the MAD Lions and Origen series was that, MAD Lions' vision for how they wanted to play the early game and transition pressure was much, much better. So this is why I am taking it with a grain of salt when people are saying that G2 are indeed playing better. I think they are playing better because honestly it was a low when they played against MAD Lions, but I'm still, hesitating because I wasn't too impressed by Origen because they couldn't find ways to play through mid lane. And I think this was a massive weakness for them, considering Nuktak honestly played super well. He just didn't have any jungle support or support, which is surprising because I think Origen's highlights throughout the split was when they figured out how to play through mid lane, because Nuktak is honestly a strong player, and I think he got a very, very bad rap this split because he was put on a duty that honestly, just handicapped Origen. Nevertheless, we continue on to the next game. I spoke about Azir, I spoke about the Lee, I spoke about the Aatrox. G2, all they need to do here is make sure that LeBlanc has prio and save bottom. Aphelios Nautilus is the only point of aggression that can create any type of pressure that will transition this game to a point in time where G2 might be in trouble. So as long as G2 control mid 2v2 and they force there the 2v2 instead of forcing on bottom like they would do against MAD Lions, they chose their timings properly, and you can go back and look at that game, and those were some of the most beautiful ganks I've seen onto Azir in forever. So check that out if you're curious. We go on to the next game. Let's see. I need to. There we go. That's better. So G2 is still on the red side. Bantam, Kench, Senna, Gragas, they're banning Tam for the Aphelios. Set gets locked in as the first pick here, so some adaptation in the draft, no more Aatrox. Aatrox didn't get, Set didn't get banned here. This was the transition after Yumi gets banned. They're looking to trade Aphelios Set, and I think probably the idea here was to blind pick Set and then pick Thresh away to put Aphelios in a position where he would be, of course, out like without a support that would be able to defend them. Last game, Destiny picked Nautilus, and Nautilus is the Destiny special, of course, but I think this is the thought process. Ban Tam, if enemy first picks Set, you get Aphelios Thresh. If enemy first picks Aphelios, you go Thresh Set. I think this is the thought process, but maybe not, because most of the time Destiny is going to pick Nautilus anyway. Aphelios Thresh, Misfortune, Nautilus, bottom matchup is evenish. I think Aphelios maybe is favored, but it's quite even because Misfortune Moby Boost is just very unbalanced. Set jungle flex is something that is always in the picture. Pantheon gets locked in. A big pick for, of course, what's his name? Jankos plays a lot. Was good. Nico blind here. It's of course a flex, but most of the time we're going to see it be played top lane. This was a game where Perkz Zillion didn't look the greatest, but if you reach a point where Aphelios is fed and strong, then that's all that matters. And this was a game where Caps was very, very strong. I think this was the game that he did indeed get a pentakill. So once again, the direction of how G2 need to play the game was very clear for them. They need to make sure bottom is ahead. And this is what they did. Nico got to push full prio on the top side. Set didn't get that much value this game. And then, eventually their composition is going to scale well, and of course OG's comp is also going to scale well, but it's all about how strong Aphelios is, and this was a game where Aphelios was very, very strong. So all of these extra tools, Zillion and the Nico Peel and the Thresh, gain a lot more value when Aphelios is ahead. So this was G2, good execution on their comp, still some slip-ups here and there, which was similar to some of the trends we saw in MAD Lions, getting caught and wasting tempo and doing some G2 specials. Next game in line, G2 tried a Varus thing, which was, honestly, this was kind of, felt like this was G2 just trying something different, trying something new. Because in a lot of cases here, I would imagine a world where they just go Talia Pantheon, Thresh first 3, and they just play Talia bottom. I think they would be happier. I think if it wasn't a position where they were 2-1, they would definitely approach this differently. They went for the set. This time around, OG didn't ban Kalista, and this is where G2 actually banned Kalista third. Very surprising decision, honestly, because OG banned Kalista 2 times in a row, and then maybe G2 called this as, okay, they're going to look for a first pick Kalista, but, Upset can definitely play it. I don't know if Alfari plays it. It is something to put in your mind. With a lot of AD carry bans, maybe the fear struck in them, so they give up sets here. They don't get anything in the trade. Varus for Misfortune, I think, is a fine trade, of course, and Set is a champion that you can definitely play into. I don't think Set is like a super powerful first pick lock-in. It's more about the fact that, it's okay. It doesn't burn the draft. Varus, Pantheon, Tam, Kench, these 3, I would still favor OG's first 3 because I think it gives them more options right off the bat. Aatrox's 4th pick was also kind of surprising. I think this is a scenario where you want to lock in mid lane 4th and then look for a 5th pick top. Because I think even though people like to blind pick top, I don't think it's as easy because there are a lot of champions that really, really excel in some specific scenarios in the game. Let's say, like if Maokai has a semi-decent matchup, that's going to be wonderful for him. And I think Renekton into Aatrox is just favored for Renekton now after all of the Blade of Ring King changes. And I think Renekton just does better here. I think if you 4th pick LeBlanc here, 5th pick top, You have a lot of options like going even Pantheon top. You have options of going even, Maokai top in some scenarios. Into Renekton, maybe Wunder could be the type of player to play something like a Quinn. If you play a ranged champion into Renekton, all of a sudden, buying Blade isn't as easy as it would be in some other matchups, especially into other melee matchups. So here, they get the LeBlanc with the set. Here, very, very good dive. First sign of OG aggression into mid lane. They dove Zoe, LeBlanc took over the game, and G2's composition honestly doesn't have any way to play the game if they're not ahead in mid lane. And I think 2v2 wise, I think LeBlanc has too much options in terms of the fights she chooses. And Misfortune also has had prior in this game. They dove mid, and this is something that OG should have been doing. The entire split. So this was good performance from OG, but also G2 with a wonky draft, I believe. Last game of the series between G2 and Origen. Let's just make sure that this is centered and nice for the viewing pleasure. Is that good? That looks good. Okay. Syndra, Yuumi, Aphelios. Bans continue the same. Set, Ornn, Misfortune. No Varus this time. I liked it more. I didn't remember Upset playing Varus, so Misfortune gets locked in. But G2 got a try on Varus, and they showcased to us that it's not so ready. But of course, they lost for other reasons too. Ornn gets locked in, Misfortune, Kai'Sa. Kind of weird how Ornn was ignored in a lot of these games. I think Ornn on red side is still super powerful after the nerfs, but definitely teams have figured out how to play against him and what to pick into him in general. Ornn, Misfortune, Kai'Sa, Nautilus, Taric. This time around, Aatrox blind pick again was very surprising. Misfortune, Taric is very good into Nautilus, Misfortune is very good into Kai'Sa, so the fact that they have Kai'Sa here into Misfortune puts Origen already in an awkward spot that they are going to be losing bottom side matchup, I believe. Taric is going to scale super, super well, he always does, so I think this is just better first three for G2. Second wave ban, Azir, LeBlanc, the blind picks that are good on blue. They're looking to last pick because they already show Ornn and have the Ornn flex. Fourth pick, Olaf. They know Set most of the time is going to go jungle, and a lot of the picks that you would want to synergize together with Set. If you don't send Set jungle and you send them top, then all of a sudden you're going to have AP junglers, right, that you want to pick with them, Sejuani, Elise, and so forth. So Olaf is a very strong pick here. Cassio is the blind pick, and just because they don't see mid lane, it becomes super difficult because there's so many mid lane bans. Zoe, Orianna, LeBlanc, Azir. Cassio is not like a bad pick per se, but Ornn is going to be very, very good with the ultimate against Cassio, and then Akali is something that historically has good matchup into Cassio. I don't know how it works right now, but she has a lot of abilities and a lot of ways to dodge. She plays on, of course, her W. The move speed is a lot less now and fades out, so of course that's a benefit to Cassio. But I would imagine, the matchup in itself at a core is very similar to what it used to be. Of course, Akali needs to reach level 6, and she needs to be able to use her R aggressively, and she needs to get value out of her ultimate. Cassio needs to find snowball opportunities between the ultimates and survive the ultimates, and if Cassio is very far ahead early on against Akali, then she can snowball that out of proportion, especially if a jungler can find those timings and look to punish. It also depends on Akali's keystone choice, if she goes Fleet Footwork or Conqueror. Conqueror is the better all-in scaling option, while Fleet Footwork makes the lane phase a bit easier, and maybe Cassio can pressure you off when you have Doran Shield with her small, relatively small like mana pool, especially if she doesn't go Biscuits and Corrupting Potion in runes, because now people are doing sorcery into domination. So Doran Shield and Fleet Footwork really gives you enough sustain to survive Cassio early levels, but she should look to get a good clean base in order to make sure that, think on maybe wave 4, wave 3, maybe wave 5 even, not wave 5, what am I saying? Like minute 5, second cannon wave, she should look to find the base. It's good for Cassio. Aatrox, once again, I already mentioned what I think about Aatrox, and I think in this comp he's not going to do much. He's not going to snowball Ornn enough to be more impactful than Ornn. That's always what you need to evaluate with. Aatrox, is he going to do enough damage and be at any point more useful than Ornn? Let's say Aatrox is 30 CS ahead. Does it really matter for the game? Does it really matter for the game if he's ahead of Ornn? Eventually, Akali is going to be able to match Aatrox depending on her, of course, as I mentioned before, her keystone choice or item choice. But Aatrox coming from a flank, I don't really believe in it this game. I don't see the purpose of Aatrox here. I think Ornn is going to just be better at every point in the game here. And once again, at G2, I think their clear line to victory is just to make sure that the 2v2 mid is where they force. And I think with Akali Olaf at 6, you have a lot of options. But of course, Casio set, I think it's 2v2. It's heavy skill dependent, but I think G2's side can snowball completely out of hand, which I think, if I remember correctly, they kind of did. There was some slip-ups here and there, and Nukta had some good Cassiopeia ults, but eventually G2 and their conversation got out of hand, because looking at their first 3, if you don't snowball super hard against this, then it's going to be over. And that's enough about G2. I just wanted to highlight that G2 played with more precision. I think there was more clarity in their draft in comparison to the MAD Lions. I think Caps played better, but still had some blunders. I think the key thing is that G2 chose their fights properly. They didn't do anything out of hand. Then again, they played against Origen, so maybe, to the blind eye, they were looking for things, and Origen were just too afraid. Right? Because Origen isn't the most aggressive team, and MAD Lions is very, very different. This leads me into the next discussion point, which is Fnatic versus MAD Lions. So on Euphoria, there was a huge point made by Bwipo and also by me, speaking about how Fnatic kind of showcased the recipe on how to beat MAD. And I think that's completely fair to highlight. So the key thing about MAD, if we want to define MAD as a team, a lot of the times it's their bot lane that controls river super well. They skirmish super well. They are very, very coordinated in how they fight 3v3s, 4v4s, and how they use TPs. Not so good at playing side. That's where Humanoid dies. That's where Oromet dies. They have a lot of isolated deaths for a reason. If you don't butt heads with them, they are forced to, give up a lot of CS to play the way they want to play. Roma as a player is not the strongest laner, and we saw that he was exposed when he doesn't get to team fight over and over and TP over and over and just wait for those big clashes. That's where Orome shines. MAD Lions rely heavily on their bottom for the early game power. In most cases, they take over River, Kaiser and Shadow work very well together. But this is something that Fnatic dealt with super well. Key differences between Fnatic and G2 is that I felt like Fnatic played super patiently. Super patiently. They played patiently when the enemy team had prio. Nemesis, I think his biggest strength is the fact that this man just doesn't die to ganks. He doesn't die to ganks. He's super patient, and he always chooses his timings well. Honestly, I'm a person that, people... when people think of me, they think of, I don't like Nemesis or I critique my Nemesis. But I think in playoffs, Nemesis has been the best mid laner in Europe in playoffs. In regular split, I think it was Perks. And so far, I've been more impressed with Nemesis than Perks in this playoffs, because I think in the series against Origen, Perks didn't look as precise as I would like him to look. Nevertheless, looking at the draft of this game, Fnatic commit into banning a lot of key picks for bottom. Set is something that, of course, Kaiser used a lot of times in the bottom side, and they won and flipped matchups that looked worse on paper. So Kaiser, probably the best support setter we have here in Europe. Senna lock in first, Ornn Aphelios get locked in. Azir was a very curious and curious adaptation. I was like, this is interesting. Lee Sin gets locked in, Gragas was banned on red, and Tahm Kench was banned here on red too. Not sure why. I think Fnatic showed a lot of, promise with a lot of different combinations than just Tahm. I think when Senna Tahm was being played, they ran into some issues. Here, Fnatic are taking Thresh as a takeaway. I don't even know if they practiced this or prepared this, but a trend has been that you want to take Tahm Thresh away from Aphelios and put him in an awkward spot, right? This is the trend that we've seen. Thresh, honestly, with items looked like a complete menace, but the key thing is Thresh, Sunfire Cape is such a strong early game item. If you reach mid game and you have a target with Sunfire Cape, in a lot of cases becomes unkillable, especially in Thresh's case, who uses Aftershock, has armor naturally from the swords as well, and so forth, depending on the lane phase, can be super, super strong. So Thresh with items definitely is not something that you can laugh at. Azir, the reason why I like this adaptation so much, because it showcased a problem that Humanoid has. Humanoid reminds me of Unicorns of Love mid laner Exile when he was playing in his prime. A key way of attacking Unicorns of Love at the time was to ban his specific champion, because he played a set few of champions. In this case, Azir gets locked in, decent into Aphelios, decent into Ornn, decent into both champions that are being shown. So Thresh Azir, already a great adaptation into Ornn, because you have ways of dealing with the ultimate, and you can kite him, and you can, deal with Ornn. So this is a very, very nice adaptation. Not the shitty Braum adaptation that we saw many, many times, because Braum gives up lane phase, while Senna Thresh denies Aphelios, and Senna Thresh is a very strong lane. So it's just a beautiful draft from Fnatic. Lee Sin gets locked in on third. They banned Gragas earlier, so there's no Gragas lock-in from them. Also, playing AD, if you are pushed into playing AD mid, it's kind of awkward, especially because enemy can just ban Kiana second wave. LeBlanc gets banned. Zilean fourth pick was interesting into Senna, but Senna Thresh I think is just too powerful. Zilean support without the money isn't as punchy as the one with money. Rek'Sai gets locked in as a jungler. Rek'Sai, I think, was just locked in here as a good matchup into Lee Sin, and just to transition this Fnatic composition to the point where they're just going to automatically win the game, because they're going to scale much better here. Senna, Thresh, Azir, Maokai lock-in just means that they reach 15 minutes into this game, and they're going to definitely dominate. When we look at MAD Lions' last pick, we see why the Azir pick is so strong. You deny the only pick that is going to be able to deal with tanks. Enemy mid laner cannot pick anything that is good into tanks, because his champion pool is limited. He locks in Zoe, and honestly playing Zoe against a Thresh that is unkillable, Maokai is unkillable, and it's just too tricky. So looking at this game, if we look at the points of prio, Maokai, Ornn, I think Ornn is better off in the matchup against Maokai, but Ornn is not going to impact the map in some significant way. Bottom, Senna Thresh, I think, have a heavy advantage, and then 2v2 mid is, kind of 50-50, slightly favored towards Zoe, depending on what she can loot, is how I view it. Rek'Sai is a bit stronger early, and then Lee Sin is better at 6, and of course it depends on Zoe RNG, but the key thing is that I think Thresh and Senna can impact mid in a very, very good way, especially post Senna level 6. So Fnatic is in a position where they scale better. The early game is definitely playable, so this was a very, very good approach. But you saw the trend throughout the series. They were already from minute 1 trying to attack Orome as the weak side player. He had some nice plays here. He had some nice plays, right? He managed to get a 1v2 kill and get out and so forth. So it's kind of wonky, but it kind of set the tone for how Fnatic viewed MAD Lions. Meaning Orome is a terrible weak side that is going to die over and over. Which means if our bottom and our mid lane is patient in those timings that MAD Lions like to find, then they're going to bleed out and starve out CS-wise, because they always maneuver themselves around in good numbers. Later, they continue with that same trend. They play a variant of 1-4, which is very good against G2, but Fnatic recognize that if they just play the side game properly, they will outfarm, and eventually they will find catches onto Oroman Humanoid. We saw Humanoid being completely shattered and outmatched in this matchup, and this is something that G2 can take away. Fnatic showed us how to beat MAD Lions. Next game, we had a interesting draft once again. This was Fnatic's so-called Bronzodia draft, where they went for the Malphite. Pantheon gets banned. These are, interesting bans into specifically Fnatic. I didn't understand the Ezreal ban. It was kind of strange. A lot of AD carry bans here, and I think Misfortune is something that they showcase, that they play a lot. I think if anything, you should look to ban Gragas thirds here, because Ezreal Misfortune is not going to just change the way you want to play the game. I think Gragas is a key pick that you banned the previous game for a reason. And giving enemy Gragas here, of course, the intention is that they're going to pick Olaf, But yeah, I think it's just two schools of thought. Some people think Olaf is good into Gragas. Of course it is, but in a lot of cases I've seen that it's just not worth it. But nevertheless, I don't think this is where we should get stuck. They look in trash for the Aphelios and then Yasuo third pick. So Yasuo third pick, of course, in a lot of cases is dangerous. Very, very dangerous, especially when you see Olaf jungle already. It's very, very easy to find ways to have a better 2v2 in mid. Because already now Olaf is a champion that you can't combo with Yasuo Gragas, and the enemy did a very good adaptation with Nautilus lock-in. But everything that is tied together here is Yasuo, Gragas, these champions are picked just to make Aphelios' life harder. Shit on Aphelios is the operation. Fnatic's thought process throughout this draft is we're going to fuck this Aphelios so hard he's not going to be able to walk. That's the whole idea. That's why they're looking in Yasuo, because in this game, Nautilus Olaf have a much stronger 2v2. Bottom matchup, Aphelios trash, Blitzcrank is locked in. Blitzcrank isn't some hard counter. It isn't some hard counter. Atros gets blind picked, Malphite gets locked in. Malphite has the liberty here to go full armor. He's not going to give a shit about Nautilus having a proto belt. He's not going to give a fuck. So this game is going to have 400 armor. And right off the bat, once again, Fnatic go with the same approach. They got a lot of kills in top. Malphite was monster fed. Atros got caught in a couple of ganks. Gragas and Malphite found kills on him, while Fnatic tried to play the patience game in mid lane and also bot lane. Blitzcrank was also feeding this game, but eventually they reached a point where Malphite was just too powerful because the enemy team had this, full armor stack, full armor, like physical damage is what I'm trying to say. And Nautilus couldn't really bring anyone down, and Aphelios couldn't play this game. So Fnatic, very clever drafting into Aphelios. They had a very good plan into it, and Thresh Lanterns had to be too perfect for this game to work, and there were just too many tools to fuck Aphelios here, right? The key thing that I want to highlight in terms of gameplay is how Orome was bleeding out so badly, making Malphite too strong, Gragas too strong, while in reality, they have a strong bottom matchup if they're allowed to push. 2v2 mid is really, really free, and their game plan should have been mid into bot and just make sure Orome dies as little as possible. Very important. Here, this game for Yasuo is super hard to play. Nautilus, Olaf, like Yasuo is a champion that is a melee champion. You have to walk on the wave. You have to always be aggressive. You have to always play on your jungle. But here, he can't play on his jungle because their 2v2 is just weaker. And Fnatic's bottom side definitely did struggle. So imagine a world where Orome doesn't die as much as he does on top. Maybe there is some potential in this game, but Malphite just got too fed. Next thing, third game. This was a complete stomp, once again. Complete stomp. This was... it wasn't complete stomp, but Fnatic got really far ahead, and then the game got a bit cocktail and so forth, blah, 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 blah. Malphite solo killed Sylas level 2. Sylas is a very good adaptation into Malphite. They're picking Malphite here for the Syndra, Thresh Gragas, and, here AD carry champion pool is rather limited. The weird thing here is that you have Syndra and then you lock in Renekton. Okay? Renekton is fine into Malphite. It's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. They are committing into sending Renekton into mid lane. What on earth was MAD Lions smoking when you blind pick Renekton mid lane? It was indeed a shocker. They wanted to do something very similar to what they did against Origen, but it's very difficult to mimic that if your mid lane matchup is complete trash. Renekton, the first time they played it mid, was against an Ornn, and here they blind picked it, which was incredibly shocking. Nevertheless, Syndra for Thresh Gragas. They're trying to limit the mobility options of Syndra. Set is also out. Syndra set is something that MAD Lions like to play a lot. Olaf Renekton gets locked in. Olaf into Gragas. This was Shadow's preparation for Gragas. We saw it also the weeks before. Renekton was the big question mark ping here. I think here you just lock in Nautilus and you're happy. I think Renekton's second wave ban is not something that's going to happen. And even if you ban Azir Cassio for Renekton, there's too many champions that are going to beat Renekton in mid lane. You must be smoking some good kush. So Malphite gets locked in for the sake of Syndra. And then here already, it is tough to predict that Fnatic is going to pick Tristana, right? It's very tough to be in the moment and think, oh, the enemy team is actually going to, lock in Tristana here because they are so AP heavy already. Like the first 3 picks are AP heavy. If you play Azir or Cassier, it's kind of awkward because the enemy team is going to have full Mercury, full MR. It's kind of shit to play either Azir or Cassier or any AP for that matter. Alright? So to not ban AD carries, like Misfortune gets down to 4th pick, is kind of crazy. You could also target mid AD champions, right? Still, Tristana is something that Nemesis didn't play, so it's like, we don't harp on it too much. Nautilus gets locked in. Malphite was kind of, it was an iffy lock-in here that potentially could have been punished. Sylas gets picked as a counter, but the Renekton blind pick mid for that is just crazy to me. You blind pick a Renekton mid to get the Sylas into a Malphite. I just don't think it's worth it. Don't think it's worth it at all. Especially when Sylas dies. Renekton is going to be at his turret the entire game. He's not going to roam. So Tristan is going to have full prior. Tristan Gragas will take over the whole game, and Malphite killed Sylas, once again showcasing a weakness in Orome, and also MAD Lions' depth when it comes to the draft. They have a specific set of champions they really want to play in the bottom side. Mid lane has a very specific champion pool, Azir, LeBlanc, and Zoe. He really enjoys these champions. You can funnel him into these situations, and you can pick a draft that is really, really good into it, right? I think always MAD Lions, it revolves either around the AD carry pick or the mid lane pick. And we saw Fnatic using a lot of bans, making sure bottom is in a very specific state. Kalista set Syndra. Kalista, Senna, set. Kalista, Senna, set. Every game set was banned, right? So Fnatic, I think, in terms of gameplay, showed how to beat MAD Lions. A lot of pressure into top side, even in games where maybe it wasn't the right way. With Maokai Ornn, we saw the 1v2. And also in other games, Malphite got ahead and so forth. And it was a question of patience. And that brings me to, of course, the G2 and MAD Lions series. G2 and MAD Lions series. This is a very long video. Jesus. Very long video. G2 MAD Lions series. I think G2 is going to win. For 3 reasons. 3 key reasons. I think G2 underperformed heavily the first time, but was still very, very close. I think G2 played better against Origen, but nothing too super exciting. I'm heavily leaning against Fnatic in the finals. G2 played with a higher level of precision, meaning that they recognized this is what they needed to play through, and this is what we are going to pressure through, and the rest of the map needs to adjust accordingly. Second, Fnatic showed the recipe of how to beat MAD Lions. Orome is a very weak side top laner. He dies a lot, he tends to feed, he wants to be able to TP, he wants to be able to get out of lane, he wants to be able to teamfight. This is what Orome is good at. In the series against MAD Lions, Fnatic, as long as they were in a position where they weren't bleeding out too bad, Orome fed Bwipo a bit too much, and the pick that Bwipo had kind of solidified that mid to late game for them. A lot of bans into that bottom side, and later on in the mid game, when it comes down to farming side lanes, playing a 1-3-1 variant, and being in between objectives, this is where MAD Lions struggle. They are very good at playing around dragons, very good at playing around teamfights and TPs, but if you take that out of the equation, all that room between objectives is still where action is necessary. And this is where Fnatic also found a lot of punishment. I remember specifically Humanoid getting caught on side many times playing Zoe, because it was very, very awkward for him. I think also targeting and thinking about Humanoid's champion pool, and in this series, he was always, besides the Nautilus game, on a very awkward champion. Even in the Nautilus game, it is kind of awkward because the enemy, lock in Malphite, and all of a sudden, you don't have the AP to deal with the Malphite. So I think Fnatic did super well with using their bans to make sure that bottom is not as explosive as MAD Lions wanted to be, remove key picks, and then draft around the other key pick that is let through, Aphelios or Syndra. And then they funnel Humanoid into a position where, sure, one game he picked Renekton himself, but highlighting his champion pool. First game was a unique example of locking in that Azir, and then all of a sudden, they knew already where the draft would go. Zoe gets locked in into Maokai Thresh. Zoe's fine into Azir, but playing against Maokai Thresh, when Thresh has all of that money, it becomes more difficult. So this is something that G2 can use. Third, I still think that Perks and Jankos is super, super strong 2v2. They showed it against MAD Lions. The level they play at in the 2v2 mid lane is beautiful. And I think if G2 realize this, they can actually be a contender, because I think this is their biggest strength. I think Jankos and Perks play insanely well together throughout the regular split. They were the best performance by far on G2. And I think G2 is in a position where some players need to recognize that they need to take a back seat. And it felt like in the Origen series that kind of was showcased, that was kind of visible. But then again, Caps had some good moments. But still some sloppy moments where I think a team like Fnatic and MAD Lions can capitalize harder than an OG did. So this is very, very important. The key word is patience. If you're patient against MAD Lions, you're going to eventually start them out. But this is not G2's strongest suit. So that's why this matchup is quite exciting. I do lean G2 though, because of the things that I mentioned. Fnatic showed them how to beat them. G2 looked better in the OG series, and also Jankos Perks 2v2 mid lane was still super, super strong. They showed it in the OG series. They showed it in the MAD Lions series too. Rumble Jarvan, magnifique. And this is the end of this video. I'm excited for the playoffs. I hope this prediction, makes sense to you. I think, in terms of score, people are curious about score. I would say 3-1. Very long video. Jesus Christ, 41 minutes. I hope, my rambling makes some kind of sense. All the best to all of you. Take care and peace. Jesus, I'm tired. Bless your face, people. Bless your goddamn face. A little secret, I have good news to share for those who watched it till the end.